Well, we know that climate change and how to deal with it will figure prominently in the election campaign. It is a key concern for many voters, and they'll have some clear options on offer from the parties. For more on that, let's bring in 4 candidates to discuss the campaign and climate change. From Montreal, we're joined by Steven Guilbeault. He's the Liberal candidate in the Montreal riding of Laurier-Sainte-Marie. He's the former founding member of L'Équiterre, Quebec's leading environmental organization. Ed Fast is the environment critic for the Conservative Party and is seeking re-election in the riding of Abbotsford in British Columbia. Peter Julian has been the finance critic for the NDP and is seeking re-election in the riding of New Westminster Burnaby in British Columbia. And Angela Keller-Herzog is the Green Party candidate in the riding of Ottawa Centre. Welcome to you all. Good to have you here to talk about this important issue. Mr. Guilbeault, let me start with you. What will your party do about climate change if you're re-elected?
Well, if I can take a minute to talk about what the party has done over the last 4 years. After 10 years of total inaction by the Harper government, the Trudeau government has put in place what is certainly the most ambitious climate change plan that we've seen in the history of the country, and probably one of the most ambitious we've seen in North America over the last few years. Record level investment in transit, in green infrastructure, in clean technologies, putting a price on carbon so that not only 2 provinces, Quebec and BC, would be doing something about it, investing in electrification. And these are only some of the measures that have been adopted over the last 4 years. And I think the platform hasn't been published yet, but what we can expect from the Liberal Party is that we will go even further, even faster in the fight against climate change in the next 4 years.
All right, Mr. Fast, what's the Conservative plan to deal with climate change?
Well, our plan is to make sure that we don't follow the Liberal approach, which has failed. The Liberal plan in 2016 fell 44 megatons short of meeting its targets. In 2017, 66 megatons short. 2018, 103 megatons short. Theirs is a failed plan. Our plan shifts the focus to technology, recognizing that you cannot tax your way to a cleaner environment. We believe by making the strategic investments in technology, Canada will be able to do more than its part to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions, including emissions emanating from Canada. And that's why our real plan for the environment, which you can see on our website, www.arealplan.ca, it outlines all the different measures that we're going to bring forward to make sure that we do our part to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right, but to recognize that this is a global challenge, not just a Canadian one.
All right, and chief among your proposals, of course, is to repeal the carbon tax, and I'm going to get to that when we broaden the conversation a bit. But Mr. Julian, let me go to you. Tell me how the NDP plans to fight climate change.
Well, first off, the Conservative record was lamentable, and so is the Trudeau government's record. When you think on September 4th, we had a decision of the Federal Court of Appeal that allows leave of application to stop the Kinder Morgan project. Half a dozen First Nations applied. This is the second time the courts have refused the Trudeau government's attempt to ram through the Kinder Morgan pipeline. The Trudeau government putting on a symbolic price on carbon that excludes large emitters, just ridiculous. The pretense of the Trudeau Liberals have actually taken action on the environment. So what is the NDP proposing? Well, we're the party of the Green New Deal. I have that motion in front of Parliament in a similar vein in other legislatures. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez has raised it in the House of Representatives. And Jagmeet Singh has presented our New Deal for People, which environmental groups is saying is the most ambitious attempt to actually combat the climate crisis that we're living through.
All right.
What's important about the New Deal for People is not just the fact that it reduces emissions by 50%, but also the job creation. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of new jobs in clean energy, in energy retrofits, in moving to a clean energy economy. And so what we're finding is, particularly among young voters, a tremendous amount of interest in the NDP's approach to fight back against the climate change.
All right, we're going to hear a lot. We're going to hear that word a lot, ambition, and who's got the most ambition. Angela Keller-Herzog, the Greens are, as I look at the existing promises being made, seem to be the most ambitious when it comes to cutting greenhouse gas emissions, 60% from 2005 levels by 2030. So tell me more about what the Green plan is, and you've heard from your colleagues here. What's on offer to Canadians from the Green Party in terms of climate change?
The Green Party is the only party that has 3 things, and that's a plan, a target, and a roadmap. and the three connected to each other. Our plan is a practical transition plan to get us to turn the ship towards the new economy. The target is informed by science and gets us to holding at the 1.5 degree temperature rise that scientists are saying is critical, so we don't tip over these tipping points that are widely feared. And where as we're speaking in this interview, the Hurricane Dorian is hitting the eastern seaboard, devastating those communities. And the third point is a 20-point roadmap that we call Mission Possible, that will get us there.
Okay, Mr. Guilbeault, but part of this, and we'll broaden the part of this conversation in this country is always about the competing interests of the energy sector and trying to deal with climate change. And I want to ask you about that. You once told the Prime Minister he can't build more pipelines and meet his climate change commitments, and yet the Liberal government has approved the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline and construction's underway. So, I mean, you've had to confront that too. How do you reconcile your Liberal candidacy with your opposition to fossil fuels and pipelines?
Well, as I said when I announced my candidacy, I did say that I was against pipeline, and I continue to be against pipelines. But that being said, when I looked at everything that the government has done, I had to come to, I think what's at stake here, you have three political parties who agree that climate change is a very serious issue, that we don't agree on everything, but we agree on many things. And you have one party, the Conservative Party, has systematically dismissed this issue. Just last weekend, we had an ex-Conservative minister who was saying that climate change would be good for Canadians. Well, that's certainly not what we're seeing with the floodings in eastern Canada, or the forest fires in Alberta or BC, or the droughts in the prairies. This idea that climate change is going to be a great thing for Canadians. So what's at stake is, who has the most ambitious plan is not, for me, the most important thing, but who has the capacity to put in place the necessary things that have to happen. Okay. And unfortunately, I believe that the Liberal Party is the only one that can do this.
Mr. Fast, we know that you and other Conservatives will slam the carbon tax and carbon pricing introduced by the Liberals. That's the number one thing that you've promised to do as a Conservative government, is to repeal the carbon tax. Explain why you believe you can actually curb greenhouse gas emissions and climate change without pricing carbon to try and change habits.
Well, we've seen attempts to price carbon across Canada in places like Ontario, which has now moved away from carbon pricing. We've seen it in British Columbia, my own province, where they promised that they were going to cap the carbon tax at $30 per ton. In fact, now it's $40 and going up every single year. They promised that it was going to be revenue neutral. Remember, $1 out of a pocket goes back into the other pocket as other tax relief. Well, in British Columbia, that's not the case anymore. It has become a blatant tax grab. Any suggestion that this carbon tax is somehow going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Canada is flawed reasoning when you place it within the political context. We believe the real promise and the real solution lies in technology and ramping up the speed at which green technology gets developed. Our plan does that. And by the way, the Liberal plan...
Can't you have both?
No, listen, why tax Canadians? The tax burden on Canadians is already very significant. When I go door to door in my community and I ask them about carbon taxes, all I get is a response, listen, we already pay enough in taxes. Stop with the taxes. We need affordability in Canada, but we need a sensible plan to address the environment.
Okay,
our plan does that.
Okay, Mr. Julian, the Conservatives are making this debate about taxes and economic hardship, and there is an audience for that, certainly in some constituencies in this country. How do you argue against that? What can you say to Canadians when this has become, for many Canadians, a debate about, we've seen the surveys, yeah, I want to do something about climate change. Wait a minute, I might have to pay more to do it. Never mind. How do you deal with that?
Well, first off, climate change is costing us about $5 billion this year. That's going to rise to $50 billion over the course of the next few years. So the economic implications are already profound. What has to happen is a transition for workers in the oil and gas sector. And I come from that sector. I'm the only member of parliament that's actually been regularly ankle deep in oil, because I worked at the Shelburne Oil Refinery in Burnaby, BC. It's now closed. So we understand the economic fundamentals are moving to that transition to make sure we're making the investment. Now, Mr. Guilbeault's party, the Liberal Party, is spending over $17 billion on the Trans Mountain Pipeline, despite the fact that repeatedly they've messed up in court and messed up on the approval process. $17 billion allows us to make that transition to clean energy and create the hundreds of thousands of jobs that come with that transition.
All right.
Other countries have done it, and Canada can.
Okay.
But you can't rely on your old lobbyist parties, Conservatives and Liberals, to actually get the job done.
Okay.
And that's why I think so many
Angela
people
Keller-Herzog, where's the Green Party on the need for a carbon tax or not?
You know, I think we need to do politics differently, and that's what Elizabeth May talks about. I think that it's hugely irresponsible to turn the carbon tax, which is one tool in a toolkit with many other tools, regulatory incentive, we can go into those weeds, but to turn the carbon tax into this political football, and then everybody's talking about this football, and Ford is putting stickers at the gas pump. I mean, this is not helping the situation. We're facing a climate crisis. Scientists are telling us about it. There's thousands
But
of
do you need to have a
youths in the
carbon
street.
tax? Do you need to have a carbon tax?
We need to have effective tools. And whether we have a carbon tax which is set too low and a number of other tools which are going to be effective, fine, then we're doing something. We're doing an action.
Right.
But if we're just saying that we're going to have like more technical subsidies for corporations, or we're going to have roundtables that talk about things, we need action. And actually, we need to work together. And not turn economic tools into political footballs.
Mr. Guilbeault, you wanted to weigh in on the conversation around, well, let me hear you on this conversation around taxes and the value of pricing carbon, whether you can have an effective plan without it.
Every single independent expert that has looked at the Conservative plan has said that their plan would do less in terms of fighting pollution and would cost more. I'm sure Mr. Fass has no explanation. He can't explain why the fact that the two best performing provinces in Canada from an economic perspective are the two provinces that have had carbon pricing in place for over 10 years, which are Quebec and BC. I mean, they're the best performing provinces right now from an economic perspective. So it is happening. This transition is happening. So the question is how do we push it to the next level? True, the Trudeau government did invest in a pipeline. I disagree with that. But for $1 that they have put in the pipeline, they're putting $15 to fight climate change. We're talking about a $70 billion climate plan that has been put into place over the last 4 years, and that will start to generate real benefit, like transit projects that are happening all across the country.
That being the case, would you support other pipelines?
No. I've said it before, and the Trudeau government even said no to the Northern Gateway pipeline. First time in our history that a federal government has said no to a major oil and gas infrastructure.
Right. So you're prepared to accept the Trans Mountain, but you won't accept any other pipelines. No more new pipelines. Is that it?
Well, I've said no. There are no other pipelines being proposed.
Well,
right
somebody
now.
might propose one. But if they do, you think the government should oppose it?
I think we need to invest less and less in new fossil fuel infrastructure and put more and more money in this transition with which the Greens, the NDP, and us agree with.
Right. Mr. Fasta, why don't you, final word as we go around here. Answer some of that. You've heard your other colleagues are largely on the same page when it comes to the fight against climate change with different kinds of approaches to it. But how do you consider that when you're painted as the party that's kind of the odd man out here, doing your own thing? Are you okay with that?
Absolutely. And that's why Canadians have a very clear choice to make. They have a Conservative Party that will not increase the tax burden on them, a tax burden that would be increased by a tax that will actually not achieve our Paris targets. We believe we have a very good plan that focuses on technology, makes sure that the large emitters do not get exemptions like they do under the Liberal plan. Huge exemptions of 90%, up to 90%. Nobody gets exempted under our plan. They have to invest in their own success, in their own technology. We believe our plan will lead us, gives us the best chance to achieve the Paris targets. And clearly, the Liberal plan is not getting us there. Everybody acknowledge that.
All right, Mr. Julian, what do you want voters to think about if climate change is driving their vote? What do you want them to think about at the ballot box?
Well, the Conservative plan is costing them already $5 billion a year. So you talk about increased taxes when we have to deal with the increasing disasters caused by climate change, it's going to hit everybody in the pocket. Secondly, the rank hypocrisy of the Liberals. They're driving a pipeline, Kinder Morgan, that will create an export for raw bitumen for the next 50 years. So there is absolutely no way to deal with the climate emergency when Mr. Trudeau's pipeline, that fortunately now has been rejected twice by the courts, is rammed through. So for a Liberal candidate to pretend that somehow they can oppose the pipeline and still be valuable to the fight back against the climate change is simply ridiculous.
All right.
And the NDP has the plan that environmental groups are saying is the most, the boldest and most effective amongst all political parties in our country's district. So people need to look at the plan on the NDP website.
They should look at everybody's plan. Angela Keller-Herzog, what do you want voters to think about when they go to the ballot box if climate change is the issue for them?
We need action. We need not only talk. Did you know that the first climate action plan that Canada had was in 1988 under Brian Mulroney? So I think that these guys, the old parties, they've had 30 years and we haven't seen any action. Canadian emissions are rising and rising, and we're second, I think, on per capita emissions after Saudi Arabia. It's not a good record. So Elizabeth May, I think, is the only leader that has unwavering commitment to climate action.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it, and good luck on the campaign trail. We'll talk again, I bet. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.